Former police officer, now investigator. So I think we covered. It was the national parks that got you started down this road, right?
It's correct. I was out there doing some peripheral research on another topic. And during the time I was in the park, some park rangers were following me around. At the end of the day, went back to my room, get a knock on the door a few hours later, and it's one of those guys in plain clothes. And they said, "Hey, we have a story to tell you." And this guy lays out a story that they've worked at a series of national parks in their career, and there have been a series of missing people. They tried to get information out of their own park system, and they couldn't do it. And then the second ranger shows up later, and he says basically the same thing. He says, "There's something unusual going on, and we think somebody ought to look into it. We know your background, and you should be the guy." So I drove away the next day, talked to a couple of police officers that were friends of mine. I said, "Hey, look into this and see if there's a lot of missing people here." They called me a few hours later and said, "Hey, there's something up." And at that time, this is about 12 years ago, the National Park Service didn't put hardly anything online about missing people. And still to this day, they deny that they have a list of missing people from the National Park Service. And guys, I could go into any medium and small size police department, almost anywhere in the United States. I could walk into the chief's office and say, "Hey, can I have a list of all the missing people in your jurisdiction?" And within an hour, they'd have it on their desk. So the reality that the National Park Service doesn't have a list of missing people is crap. And really from there, just a lot of hard work, because if they're not going to give you the cases because they say they don't have any lists, then you got to go out and make it yourself. And about 2-3 years ago, I'd written about 60 plus cases in Yosemite National Park, which has the most missing person cases that fit our profile of any place in the world. And then suddenly Yosemite comes out with a list of missing people. The only park that has come out with a list of missing people. And the reason they came out with that list, because I had written about all of them already. Now, they haven't given me anything else from any other parks. They're very reluctant to give up case files. It's a big obstruction to the entire process. And when we did Missing 411, The Hunted, we were thinking about doing cases out of Yosemite and out of other national parks just on hikers. But the obstruction was so prevalent and so big that it was hard to just
not motivated to do anything.
Well, in the books, I write that the cases that fit our profile, which is unique, has a history of FBI agents showing up and telling the investigators or sheriffs that are on scene, "Hey, we're not going to get involved. We're just here to monitor and write up a report."
All right.
And what that really tells you is that the FBI is monitoring these cases. Now, why is that important? Because they see something in these cases that most people don't. And the FBI does not investigate missing people. They have a subsection in their jurisdictional operating procedure that says that they can investigate young children that disappear, but they don't investigate missing people. So why are these agents showing up on scene on missing adults? And that's really the $1 million question. Now, I've spoke to a couple of FBI agents that are really good friends of mine, and they said, "Dave, what they're doing is they're writing up these reports, they're sending it to the profiling unit, and they're putting up a massive profile, very similar, almost identical to what I've done in these books about the missing cases, because they all fit the specific profile that I write about. And I don't write about just general missing person cases. It has to fit this profile. So first of all, you start off with vetting the cases. I'm looking for if there's any animal predation on the case, any evidence of it. And search and rescue people look for this right away. Second thing I look for is there any mental illness associated? Did the person threaten to commit suicide? Were they suicidal? And if they were, I'd exclude the case. I'd exclude the case if there was any predation involved. And then after probably reviewing 1,000 cases, I had these stacks of law enforcement cases all throughout my living room, because I'd noticed that certain cases had certain things that other cases didn't. Big one, like 98% of all the cases I've written about, when they bring canines to the scene, the canines can't pick up a scent. That is not normal. I worked on a SWAT team, and we had the canine unit, 20 dogs assigned to us. And I've been on hundreds of these tracking cases. And in all of those cases, I cannot ever remember one where the dogs didn't track and find the person. So when canines can't find a scent, that's unusual. Number two, no tracks. They bring in professional trackers. They can't find tracks of the person from the point they were last seen. In association with the disappearance or at the start of the search and rescue, there's a change in the weather. Big one. If
they say that all good things must end someday, autumn leaves must fall, but don't you know? In association with the disappearance or at the start of the search and rescue, there's a change in the weather. Big one. If the person is found, they're often found in an area that had been previously searched. Sometimes not once or twice, sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Strange. And that's not an indictment of the search and rescue teams, because I don't think the people were there when they were searching. The victims, if they're found, they're missing clothing or shoes, oftentimes other personal items. The average time of the disappearance is at 4 p.m. Many times the victims have, say, a disability or an illness of some type. If they're found, they often have a lack of memory. They don't remember how they got lost, what predated them being lost, or even how they got found. They're oftentimes found in or near water. Boulders and granite play a big role in this, and that's why Yosemite comes into play. There's something I call point of separation. Oftentimes, we as hunters go out with buddies, and after an hour walking through the woods, we say to ourselves, hey, guys, let's split up. We could probably do better alone, and let's, you take that area, I'll take this area, and we'll go out. That point of separation, it's almost as though something is watching, because right after they separate, something happens to one of them. Distance traveled. And when I refer to that, I talk about young kids. First movie I did, Missing 411, it was about young children who disappeared. And we brought in Les Stroud, Survivor Man, to try to replicate a route that one of these kids took. And in the middle of the night, Les stopped the crew and said, hey, we're not doing this. This is crazy. We'll walk off a cliff. We'll kill ourselves. This kid did not do this alone. And we're talking about 8, 10, 12 miles that a 2-year-old supposedly traversed in 8 hours, over fences, over mountains, and an unreal number of miles. And then there's an equipment malfunction in many of these cases. Airplane or helicopter crash, sometimes compasses just spin in circles. And then the last two are biggies. If the person's found and they're deceased, many, many times, the coroners cannot determine a cause of death. Now, when my son was playing Division I hockey, I got a call from a coroner's office.
You must be careful to get to know your surroundings first, especially if there is a forest nearby. Because what happened to Mr. Rodriguez, the young man who recorded this video, might happen to you.
Hey guys, I just wanted to show you guys my cool base that I made a while ago with my cousin. It's really nice. See, we got the entrance all fenced off. Got this thing, I don't know what it is. Oh. Well, that stinks. But yeah, we got some chairs. What was that? Is that a cow? What is that? Oh, frick!
Was that a person? Literally, only a few seconds passed before a strange being emerged from the foliage to chase him like an animal hunting its prey. And although there is no context of what happened later, some suggest that it is the Rake, a humanoid-looking creature that feeds on human flesh, and that in general, and according to legends, inhabits desolate places, waiting for its next victim. Do you think it's actually the Rake? Or is this video just fake? Leave your opinions in the comment box. Number 4.
When my son was playing Division I hockey, I got a call from a coroner's office, a big one on the East Coast. And their head coroner said, David, we want to meet with you. So they meet me out at the city where Ben was playing hockey, and we sit in this hotel room. We ended up talking for like 3 or 4 hours. And this coroner said, Dave, you said something in your books that we've known about for years that nobody wants to even address.
And that is that we're scientists. We determine the cause of death. And we can't find out the cause of death on many of these cases. And you hit the nail on the head. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to address it. They just want to push it aside and move on. Last one, geographical clustering. I'm big on maps. And my last two books, Missing 411 Montana and then Idaho, both those come with maps that are about 2 foot by 3 foot, that are driving maps of the state that we had done for us, where we put the missing people in the map so you can see how they cluster up in certain areas. And there's 62 geographical clusters of missing people in North America. Again, that largest cluster is in Yosemite, but they're all over the U.S. with the absence right down the middle of the U.S., north to south, from North Dakota down to Texas. There's this wide gap with almost no missing people. It's very strange. But that's kind of the process for the profile points, guys.
So let's talk a little bit about a couple of these cases involving hunters.
Okay. So first of all, like I said, we have these profile points. Well, from those profile points, we had subgroups. Yeah. And the subgroups were berry pickers, mushroom pickers, sheep herders, and hunters. Mm-hmm. And hunters were part of the group because a large number of them have gone missing under very unusual conditions. A lot of hunters are hunting family property that's been in the family for decades. And the idea that these people became lost isn't realistic. And even their family members said, this doesn't make any sense at all. And there was no mental illness, et cetera. Now, Idaho, the reason I picked that state for the next book is because I've spent a lot of time driving through it and hiking in it. And it is some rough country. I live in Montana, and it's rough, but Idaho is equally as tough and remote. There's a couple cases that I'll tell you about that defy any logical explanation. The first one is October 5th, 2018. And there was a woman who was a U.S. Forest Service Ranger for 25 years. And her name was Connie Johnson. And she was in the Moose Creek Ranger Station, which is a very remote area of Idaho. And she knew this region like you know your backyard. And when she retired, she was in really good health. She was hired by a packing company, a hunting team, to set up camps deep in the wilderness for their hunters. And this was in a place called Fog Mountain. And you can find it on Google. And she was sent in on horseback. They rode in for her a long ways. And her and her dog, Ace, were dropped off with the guides. And they laid out everything. And her job for 3 days was to set up the camp, and then the hunters were coming in. Well, about the second day, they got on the radio, and they're trying to reach her, and they heard something garbled, and they couldn't exactly tell what she said. But they came in the third day. This was October 5th, 2018, and the camp was abandoned. Connie's gone. Her dog, Ace, is gone. And they thought, well, maybe she took a hike. So they continued to set up the camp. Connie doesn't show up. So they start searching. Now, it's a full day in and a full day out, so they wanted to search a day before they called the sheriff. Well, they come out, they get the sheriff, and they send a whole team in. And there's probably 30 different deputies and residents that took part in the search. Now, here's the really weird part about this. In the same county, 30 miles away, on the same day that they realized Connie was missing, in Elk City, Idaho, just about 25 miles outside of Elk City, is a place called the Penman Mine. Now, all the hunters out there, Elk City got its name for a good reason. Yeah. Elk. And it's a famous hunting area. Well, the Penman Mine was an old abandoned mine, and a TV crew from Great Britain had brought in a group of 8 people to film a segment about supposedly ghosts at the mine. But then there was another story that it was going to be a segment for the movie series Gold Rush. And they were never given clarity as to exactly why. But here's the story that's bizarre. They get a group of locals to loan them ATVs. And one of the locals out of Elk City drove them in there, and they all followed in their ATVs. They get there, they film all day. And at the end of the day, they're standing on a bluff looking down the hill. And one of the crew members takes off on a dead friggin' run into nothingness in the middle of nowhere. No. And one of the locals that was there said, I wouldn't have believed it unless I saw it. He ran faster than anyone I've ever seen. One of the other guys in the crew started yelling, hey, where are you going? Where are you going? And started to chase him. Nothing. So the crew turns around, gets back on their ATVs. They come down the hill, and the first house they come to is this guy who's lived up there during the hunting months for 20 years. I interviewed the guy, went to his house. So David was the strangest thing ever. These crew people were absolutely dumbfounded. They had known this guy for years. He had worked on the series for a number of years, and they had no idea what he was doing. So this local calls the sheriff. The sheriff starts responding from Elk City, which is going to take him at least an hour. So he gets on his ATV with a couple of. So anyhow, they get there, and this local tells me, Dave, it's pitch black. It's starting to snow, weather, and they're screaming for this guy. Nothing. They eventually get back to the bottom of the hill, and now they've got 2 searches in the same county of people missing on the same day under very weird circumstances. And make a long story short, both searchers go on for 5 to 7 days. They don't find anything. Neither person is ever found. Terrence Woods, the guy who's missing at the Penman Mine, his dad hired a private investigator to go in because he was afraid that somebody killed his son and didn't believe everybody in the crew. But
When the investigator came out and interviewed the local, he said, no, it happened just like that. The guy's father couldn't believe it. My son graduated from the University of Maryland, good kid. What's the way to do this?
Or did they say he ran and just like he vanished?
No, you said it better than me.
Okay.
He ran into the woods and disappeared.
Okay, so their view of him got obstructed. They couldn't keep up with him, and then he just vanished.